So today I'm going to get started on a new project that I'm really excited about. I'm going to a wedding this October, and the dress code for the wedding is black tie, which is the first time that I've ever been invited to a wedding that's this fancy. And I'm really excited about it because I feel like that's just the perfect opportunity to wear a gown that is really fancy. I was looking at some of the gowns that I've already made, but I feel like they're a little bit too fairy tale ethereal for a wedding like this. And also, I just want an excuse to make another gown. So I thought that this is the perfect opportunity to finally make the fancy dark green gown of my dreams. So I immediately came up with this sketch for the gown, and I think I'm actually going to make it a little bit different than this. I originally was thinking that I would make the bodice part under the cups sheer, but after playing with the fabric and doing some layering, I decided that I don't really want to do that. I'm just going to make it solid there. But I really like this look of the sort of illusion skirt with the embroidery trailing up the skirt and then coming over the side. I'm not totally sure if I want to do the lining of this skirt short so that it shows a lot of leg. I'm just going to kind of play around with the fabric because I'm not sure if that's going to make it less formal or if I will feel uncomfortable with something that's on the shorter side. I usually like to wear longer skirts. But I do really love how it kind of creates this illusion of the flowers kind of trickling up the dress. So I'm going to play around with that. That part's not decided yet, but I did find the perfect fabric to make this happen. So for fabric options, I did find this really beautiful embroidered tulle fabric. I was looking for something that was a little bit more delicate and like more of a vine shape, but it was really hard to find something that was like in the color I wanted. And up close, these flowers are not super elegant, but I feel like from far away it's going to create the illusion that I want it to. And I do like how the fabric is more dense on the bottom and then it slowly becomes less dense towards the top. I think that's going to be perfect for the bodice part. And also I am going to probably cut some of these applique pieces and just place them around myself where I think that they'll look best. But I'm going to layer that fabric over this fabric on top. This is a dark green silk dupioni that I have just had in my stash for a long time. I realized that this was a perfect match with the tulle that I bought. I bought the embroidered tulle first, and then I remembered that I had this and I was really excited because I didn't want to spend more money on silk. So this part will go on top, and I'll probably layer the applique pieces kind of across like that, and then use some of the tulle to make like the little shoulder frills that I have going on in the sketch. And then for the lining part, it's really hard to find fabric in the shade of green that I want, like an elegant dark green. So it was a bit of a struggle. This is the best that I could find in the satin world that wasn't stretch satin. I'm not really in love with this color, but it does work well layered under the tulle, as you can see here. And it's probably most likely going to be just like a shorter lining skirt underneath that fabric and then on the inside. I did just order some swatches of another fabric that is a silk charmeuse that I have a feeling will be closer to this fabric, so I'm going to test that out and I might end up going with that one. I would prefer to work with the silk because this is polyester satin and it just feels like kind of cheap quality. I don't love working with polyester. The silk is a little bit more expensive, but if I'm putting all the work into this gown, then I might as well put it into something that's worth it. So that's on hold for now, but I figured that today I could at least get started on working on the foundation of the dress. So mainly the bodice part. And my plan for that is to cut it out of the silk dupioni that I just showed you. And then also it's going to need a lining layer. That one should be made out of the lining fabric that I end up going with, which at this point I don't know if it's going to be the satin or the charmeuse. But I do want this gown to have like a proper foundation lining, so it's going to have boning in it and everything. That'll do most of the shape work, and then the silk dupioni layer will just kind of be placed on top with the embroidery on it. So I won't be able to get super far on this today, but I can at least work on the pattern and get everything prepared for when I do decide what the lining fabric is going to be. I have a couple ideas about how the construction is supposed to work for this gown, and I'm not totally sure because I really do want the foundation to extend past the waist. I feel like that provides a lot more support for a gown like this, especially something that's like semi-strapless. This one's not totally strapless, but I do want it to have like a very corseted effect in the bodice, and I feel like that just works better if the foundation extends past the waist. So I will show you what that looks like when I make that part, but I'm not sure if I'm actually going to be able to do that because of the original design that I have, so I'm kind of playing around with a few different things. This might end up changing a little bit, but we're going to figure it out. It's going to be a journey, and I'm excited to get started. To get started on this dress, I needed a pattern for the bodice, so I took the pattern from this foundation pattern I recently drafted that fit pretty well, and then I drafted out the general shape of this new design to be tested for a fitting. There's basically two different sets of patterns for the bodice, one set for the outer layer and one for the lining. The lining differs from the top layer in that it extends past the waistline into the hips. Extending this layer into the hips makes it much more supportive. It essentially becomes a corset and provides support for the entire dress by being securely fastened at the waist, with no room to move up or down. The outer layer will stop at the waist and is purely aesthetic in this case. The lining is also a tad bit smaller in some places and a tiny bit shorter, so that it can create a nice edge at the neckline once these two layers are sewn together. The next step was to begin making the bodice. I still didn't have the fabric for the lining, so I started the outer layer, which is a more exciting layer to make anyway. So I started cutting out this silk dupioni fabric and sewed it together. I was still figuring out the design and realized too late that I wanted to layer some tulle pieces over this green silk. It would have been better to flatline these pieces together first and then sew the seams together, but I didn't want to take apart every seam, so I just layered the tulle on top. This only really works because I'm adding this boning channel detail on top, which will hide the seams of the tulle. If I didn't have the seams from the tulle, it would be pretty unsightly, I think, and I would have had to take apart all the green silk seams to hide the tulle inside. But since I wanted these boning channels anyway, it didn't matter. I'm actually not even going to put boning in these, but I feel like it adds a layer of texture to the bodice, and this is just kind of a detail that I'm really fond of adding to dresses, if I'm honest. With the foundation of the bodice pretty much done, I could start adding on applique pieces to embellish it. This is one of the funnest parts, getting to decide where you're going to place each piece. My original sketch was going for an asymmetrical kind of design, so I tried to stay true to that with the placement of these pieces. Moving on to the foundation of the bodice, this will be the main structural corset layer of the garment, which holds everything together. This involves cutting my foundation pattern out of Hymo and flatlining it with the silk charmeuse I got for the lining, adding a waist tape so it stays at my waist, and adding boning for support and structure. This is the secret to making any gown fit really well, and you'll see some type of supportive layer like this in any really fancy gown that you look inside of. So next I needed to make the straps. I ended up cutting the hem of my skirt at this point so I could use the extra fabric to make the straps. The result was plenty of fabric to make straps from, and I was happy to get hemming the skirt out of the way before I even had to think about it. To make the straps, I folded a strip of tulle in half and ran a gathering stitch through it to create a ruffle. I added this ruffle piece to the base of the strap, which I already made with the same technique of overlaying the tulle over the silk dupioni fabric. I actually messed this part up several times and had to take the stitches out and redo it off camera. Like literally 3 times. I guess my brain stopped braining that day. Next was stitching the embroidery into place on the bodice, which is my favorite part of making a gown like this. Then I made some bra cups out of the same shape of the cup that I used for the bodice and added these to the foundation layer to make the cups look smoother. Then I could finally attach the top layer to the foundation and the bodice is essentially done. Except for the grommet closure, which I want to wait until the skirt is done to figure out. So onto the skirt we go. Not really a whole lot to say about the skirt. I cut the pieces out and stitched the seams together and then gathered it into the bodice. It was so boring I didn't bother filming it. With the skirt attached, I could now fill in the empty spots that still needed applique. I also somehow completely forgot to put any applique on the back bodice, so I'm going to hand stitch those pieces on. Would have been a lot easier to do this by machine, but mistakes were made. I also added some more applique pieces to the left shoulder to balance out the symmetry of the gown, and hand sewed those on as well. And finally, I'm almost done. I just need to add a modesty panel for the back opening. I cut this out of the silk dupioni fabric and hand stitched it into the back of the gown. And that is the final step, so without further ado, let's see how this thing turned out. So the dress is all finished, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. I'm really glad that I gave myself enough time in advance to start working on this because the wedding is next weekend, so I really was cutting it close for a minute there. But I feel like it was a success. I've only made like maybe 5 or 6 evening gowns in my life, and they're so complicated that I feel like there's always something with them that I'm a little bit upset about, like construction wise, or just they're just never perfect. But I feel like with this one my skills are really starting to improve, and the things that were issues in the past I'm working through a little bit better and being a little bit less lazy, and finally starting to feel like I'm making really great gowns. Of course, I'm always going to find an issue with it because I'm a perfectionist, but considering that this is the first time I've ever made like this exact gown, I think it turned out pretty great. So as you saw when I was making the dress, the foundation really comes down to like the hip area, and that means that I have it really secure and tightened at the waist like a traditional corset, and it just makes the whole dress feel like very supportive, especially for something that's like kind of a revealing neckline. And even like if this was strapless, I feel like it would be really supportive. So technically it could be worn as a strapless gown, and that's something that people are always scared of because they're like tugging at their dresses the whole time, like trying to lift it up, but definitely don't feel that at all. Like this thing is not moving. So that part definitely worked really, really well, especially because I wanted to do this kind of complicated surface design with the boning and this little pointed waist. It was my first time trying out something like that, so I'm glad that it worked out. I suppose the only thing that I don't really love about the dress would be maybe the shape of the skirt. I think it's a little bit poofy on top, and especially with the appliques kind of hitting exactly at hip level, it does kind of throw off the balance of the dress a tiny bit. But considering how hard it was to find a fabric that was like a green embellished floral design, I don't really think I had many other options other than buying green tulle and then cutting out every single flower and placing every single flower, and that just, for a dress that I'm probably going to wear like once or twice, I just really didn't want to go through that much trouble. So anyway, I'm happy with the results because the alternative meant a lot more work. So that's it for the show and tell. I hope you enjoyed this process as much as I did. I had a lot of fun making this gown, and every time I make one of these gowns, I feel like I'm really addicted to the process. So I'll probably be making something else soon. I'm curious to know if you have like a certain aesthetic in mind for a gown. Drop your ideas in the comments for some new gown aesthetics that you'd like to see. I'm definitely leaning towards more of like a dark blue kind of starry night court kind of vibe, because I keep seeing dresses like that everywhere and they're so gorgeous, and I really love the like blue and silver starry kind of combo, and I've seen some really pretty fabrics out there. So let me know what you think about what you'd like to see next, and I'm gonna go wear this dress to a wedding.